The man began an affair with the family's young maid. After his wife discovered the affair, she suddenly fell to her death from a staircase. Then, after the maid gave birth to the man's child, she mysteriously vanished, and all of it seemed to be connected to a curse that had been passed down through the village for generations. One day, the teenage detective Hajime and Miyuki arrived at Meijin village at the request of their upperclassman Satsuki to assist with an archaeological excavation. Today, only 3 families remain in the village, and each family's residence carries a different name. They are known as Jade Pavilion, Spear Pavilion, and Satsuki's home, 7 Mirrors Pavilion. There was once a 4th residence called Bronze Bell Pavilion, but it was destroyed in a fire 10 years ago. The group soon arrived at 7 Mirrors Pavilion. At that moment, Hajime suddenly felt as though someone was watching them from the 2nd floor. According to Satsuki, the person upstairs was her mother Kyoko. Kyoko was extremely reclusive and disliked interacting with outsiders. Because of this, she always dressed in black and wore a veil over her face. No one had ever seen what she looked like. Just then, Satsuki's aunt Asuka came out to greet them. Ever since Satsuki's father had died in an accident a year earlier, Asuka had not seen Satsuki once. Soon afterward, the group entered the mansion under the guidance of the maid Yayoi. But the moment Hajime stepped inside, he was startled by a large statue. Satsuki explained that the statue represented the guardian deity of Meijin village, Magamatori god. Afterward, Satsuki led Hajime and Miyuki to a reception room on the 2nd floor. There, they met the other members of the archaeological team. The team's leader Akihiko explained the purpose of the excavation. Their mission was to locate the 4 legendary devil's artifacts that had been left behind in Meijin village. As it turned out, a vast number of historical relics were buried beneath the village. However, the items they were searching for were not ordinary artifacts. They were the cursed devil's artifacts of Magamatori god. According to Kenji, the owner of Spear Pavilion, someone had once discovered all 4 artifacts before. That person was Satsuki's great-grandfather. Satsuki added that her great-grandfather had gained enormous wealth through possession of the devil's artifacts. He had even become a member of parliament, but his good fortune did not last, because the devil's artifacts were cursed. He soon suffered terrible consequences. Members of his family began dying one after another under mysterious circumstances. In an effort to escape the curse, Satsuki's great-grandfather buried the 4 devil's artifacts somewhere within Meijin village. From that point on, the village became the sealing ground for the 4 cursed treasures. However, the devil's artifacts also held tremendous archaeological value. Akihiko therefore urged everyone to approach the matter scientifically instead of believing in superstitions. After saying that, Akihiko instructed his assistant Torabino to bring out replicas of the 4 devil's artifacts. He asked everyone to familiarize themselves with their appearances. Once all preparations were complete, the group headed out early the following morning to Magamatori Cave. Akihiko suspected that the 4 devil's artifacts might be hidden somewhere inside. There, they found a massive stone door. Hajime noticed a handle at the far end of the door, but no matter how hard he pulled, the stone door would not budge. Satsuki explained that the door could only be opened by 2 people pulling together. As she spoke, she inserted a key into a small hole in the stone door. Almost immediately, a second handle appeared, with Hajime and Toyohiro working together. The massive stone door slowly opened. At Akihiko's command, the entire archaeological team quickly got to work. However, after excavating for an entire day, all they found was a large collection of pottery. As night began to fall, the group had no choice but to leave and return home. Satsuki locked the stone door and handed the key to Hajime for safekeeping, because in Satsuki's eyes, Hajime was the person she trusted most. The somewhat intimate atmosphere between them immediately made Miyuki jealous. After returning, Hajime sought out Miyuki to explain things to her, but just then, he suddenly caught the smell of a strong gas leak in the air. He immediately instructed everyone inside to open all the doors and windows. Afterward, everyone sat down together for dinner. Suddenly, Akihiko realized that one of the team members, Yamato, had yet to appear. After dinner, everyone returned to their rooms to rest. Only Hajime remained behind, still finishing his meal. But at that very moment, Miyuki suddenly saw something terrifying. Magamatori god appeared near Magamatori cave. The horrifying sight made her scream in terror, yet Hajime couldn't see anything at all. He couldn't help but suspect that Miyuki was simply exhausted and imagining things. Hajime headed into the kitchen to make Miyuki a cup of hot tea, but no matter what he tried, he couldn't get the gas stove to light. Satsuki walked over, casually turned the knob, and ignited the flame with ease. Just then, the others in the living room noticed something shocking. A huge flock of crows had gathered around Magamatori Cave. Realizing that something was wrong, everyone rushed over at once. They quickly unlocked the stone door and entered the cave. As flashlight beams illuminated the darkness, the group made a horrifying discovery. Yamato was lying motionless on the ground. Around his neck hung one of the devil's artifacts, a necklace, while everyone else immediately assumed that this was the curse of the devil's artifacts. Hajime recognized at a glance that this was no curse. It was a carefully planned locked room murder. Considering that the stone door required 2 people to open, Hajime concluded that the killer who murdered Yamato must have been the very person who helped him open the door. At that moment, Kenji also noticed something. The necklace around Yamato's neck wasn't the real devil's artifact at all. It was merely a replica. The group immediately returned to the mansion and inspected the box where the replica devil's artifacts had been stored. Sure enough, only the bronze bell remained inside, which meant that 3 more artifacts had already been taken, and if the killer's pattern continued, 2 more people would die. However, one thing still bothered Hajime. Why had the killer deliberately left the bronze bell behind? Satsuki could only think of one explanation: the death curse. It turned out that her great-grandfather's possession of the 4 devil's artifacts, while bringing him fame and wealth, had also brought disaster. His children and his wife had all died mysteriously, each affected by a different devil's artifact. This filled the great-grandfather with fear. One night, however, Magamatori God appeared to him in a dream. The deity told him that to escape the curse of the last devil's artifact, the bronze bell, he must follow 3 rules. The first rule was to bury all 4 devil's artifacts somewhere within Meijin village. The second rule was to construct 4 separate residences shaped according to each devil's artifact, and to sincerely worship them there. Just as Satsuki was about to mention the third rule, Yayoi suddenly rushed in, saying that all the phone lines in the house had been cut. At this news, everyone panicked. Toyohiro immediately ran toward the village exit. Satsuki's uncle Kenichi followed him without hesitation. In an instant, the scene descended into chaos. The remaining members had no choice but to follow. But at that moment, Hajime remembered Satsuki saying that to leave the village, one had to pass through a tunnel. Recalling this, a sense of unease rose in Hajime's chest. Sure enough, as soon as the group entered the tunnel, the entire structure collapsed with a deafening roar. Fortunately, they reacted quickly and escaped the tunnel, but just as they emerged, the giant bell from the mountaintop came crashing down and crushed Satsuki's uncle Kenichi to death. The horrifying sight caused Satsuki's Aunt Asuka to faint on the spot. When they returned to the residence, they found that the bronze bell had already vanished. This filled Satsuki with guilt. She felt that all of this had happened because she had failed to follow the third rule. At that moment, Miyuki was struggling to open a sugar jar. Yayoi mentioned that if the jar were gently heated, the expanding air inside would allow it to open. Yayoi's casual remark sparked a sudden idea in Hajime's mind. He immediately sought out Akihiko and the others and shared his deduction. Although no one could open the stone door from outside alone, if 2 people coordinated, one inside, one outside the door could be opened easily. It's likely that after everyone left Magamatori Cave, Yamato hid away and then arranged with someone to search for the devil's artifacts together under the cover of night, and the person Yamato arranged with was most likely Toyohiro, the one responsible for checking whether everyone had left. Faced with this deduction, Toyohiro immediately objected. He admitted that he had indeed made a plan with Yamato, but insisted he had not committed murder. Toyohiro then realized that perhaps this series of killings might somehow be connected to Satsuki's father Shiro. His words caused Hajime to fall into deep thought. For a moment, Hajime couldn't determine who the real killer was. Just then, Satsuki entered the room, throwing herself into Hajime's arms. She then revealed the third rule of Magamatori God. According to the rule, every female member of Satsuki's family, after turning 17, must remain in Seven Mirrors Pavilion, and must choose a husband before that age. Satsuki spoke through tears. Seeing this, Hajime quickly moved to comfort her, but this scene was witnessed by Miyuki, who had opened the door unexpectedly. Angry, Miyuki turned and walked away. The next morning, Hajime, worried that Miyuki was still upset, explained everything to her. No sooner had he finished speaking than Satsuki rushed in anxiously. claiming that something terrible had happened at Seven Mirrors Pavilion. Hajime immediately returned to the scene. He discovered that all 7 mirrors in the hallway had been smashed. At that moment, Yayoi pointed back in horror. The group rushed into the records room and found Toyohiro dead. Hajime noticed that beside Toyohiro was a mirror, the replica of one of the devil's artifacts. In Toyohiro's hands were also 2 calendars. Hajime deduced that these were Toyohiro's final messages. The calendars must contain evidence pointing to the killer. Hajime began to observe the area carefully. Soon, he found a floor plan on the first floor. Akihiko explained that it was the floor plan of Seven Mirrors Pavilion. At that moment, Asuka complained, blaming all the chaos on Satsuki's father, Shiro, whose obsessive search for the devil's artifacts had caused the tragedies. She said that Shiro's accidental death was punishment for angering Magamotori God. Her words immediately made Hajime suspect that the string of murders was connected to Shiro's death in some way. He returned to his room to think alone, but soon, his thoughts were interrupted by Satsuki's mother Kyoko. Kyoko hoped that Hajime could deliver a letter to Satsuki and tell her that she no longer needed to fear Magamotori God, because Kyoko would personally put an end to everything. After saying this, Kyoko turned and left. Not long after, Hajime heard a scream from Kyoko. He rushed toward the sound, only to be shocked to see Magamotori God holding Kyoko. Magamotori God then dashed out of the window and ran toward the forest. The group chased after him to a waterfall, but found nothing. All that remained on the riverbank was a knife, a replica of one of the devil's artifacts, and Kyoko's veil. Back at the residence, Hajime began to think through the entire series of events. While he pondered, Miyuki suddenly noticed that strange statues had appeared outside. Hajime glanced at them and immediately understood something. He then looked again at the floor plan. During this process, he accidentally pricked his hand on a nail holding a calendar to the wall. That small prick suddenly made everything clear. Hajime gathered everyone together and began his reasoning. First, regarding Yamato's death, given the existing conditions, it was clear that the stone door required 2 people to open, but the killer didn't even open the stone door at all. This means that the killer killed Yamato from the outside. The sequence of events must have been as follows. By chance, the killer discovered Yamato's arrangement with Toyohiro. He rushed to the stone door ahead of Yamato. Then, he filled the room with gas through the door's crack. When Yamato smelled the gas and tried to breathe through the window, the killer strangled him using the devil's artifact from outside. Finally, the killer pushed Yamato into the center of the locked room. This ensured that anyone who discovered Yamato's body would believe he had died because of the curse. As for the identity of the killer, the 2 calendars in Toyohiro's hands had already provided the answer. First, in the room where Toyohiro was killed, there were nails on the wall, but no calendars were hanging. This indicated that before his death, Toyohiro had discovered the killer's identity. With his last strength, he tore down the 2 calendars. This action, however, drew the killer's attention. To prevent exposure, the killer took the entire calendar. This meant that the calendars contained clues revealing the killer's identity. Among everyone present, only the maid Yayoi had a name associated with months. Satsuki and Kenji dismissed it as mere coincidence, not evidence. Seeing this, Hajime pulled out the menus from the past few days. By observing them, he noticed that under normal circumstances, Yayoi always prepared hot meals for dinner, but on the night Yamato was killed, she had prepared only cold dishes. That night, Yayoi had used gas to commit murder, which made it impossible for her to use the stove to cook. This also explained why Hajime had been unable to light the stove to make tea for Miyuki later. The reason Satsuki was able to light it easily afterward was simple. Yayoi had reconnected the gas supply at that time. Hajime continued his deduction regarding the death of Satsuki's uncle Kenichi. Kenichi's death was purely accidental, but Yayoi used it to make it appear as though the devil's artifact's curse had struck again. Next came Toyohiro's case. Yayoi had killed him using one of the devil's artifacts, a mirror, and had broken all the mirrors in the pavilion. By doing this, she could perpetuate the rumor of the curse, while discreetly hiding the true location of the devil's artifacts. At this point, Hajime began his reveal. He instructed everyone to gather the 7 mirrors. Then, they were to place them exactly according to the floor plan. Once everything was in position, Hajime asked them to carefully examine the floor plan. Soon, they noticed that the 7 mirrors were set at different angles. In an instant, everyone understood the truth. They then stood at the entrance of the pavilion of the 7 mirrors and looked inside. The sight left them speechless. Through the reflections of the 7 mirrors, they finally saw a statue at the back door. Hajime took an axe and struck the statue with full force. As it shattered, they immediately discovered a box hidden inside. Inside the box were the real devil's artifacts. Yayoi, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke the truth. It all dated back 20 years. At that time, Yayoi was a young maid. On her first day seeing Satsuki's father Shiro, she fell in love with him at first sight, but Shiro was already married. One day, Shiro's wife Kyoko not only destroyed his archaeological work, but also forced him to change careers. Shiro was heartbroken. Yayoi seized the opportunity to confess her love to him. From then on, they began an affair. Soon after, Yayoi discovered she was pregnant with Shiro's child. Kyoko, furious at the news, confronted her. During the struggle, Yayoi accidentally pushed Kyoko down the stairs. Yayoi had intended to turn herself in, but Shiro, thinking of the child, devised a plan. He decided that Yayoi would continue living as Kyoko. Hajime immediately realized that the Kyoko he had seen that day was actually Yayoi in disguise, and the Kyoko held by Magamotori God was merely a mannequin. Yayoi continued her story. Not long after, she gave birth to a girl Satsuki. Their lives were peaceful for a time, but the appearances of Toyohiro and Yamato disrupted everything. Their negligence at work caused a landslide that killed Shiro. Yet, instead of feeling remorse, they set their sights on the beautiful Satsuki. To protect Satsuki, Yayoi decided to use the devil's artifact's curse to kill them. After revealing this, Yayoi suddenly grabbed the knife from the devil's artifacts, intending to end her own life, as she was already terminally ill with little time left. But at the last moment, Satsuki stopped her. In the end, Yayoi was hospitalized for treatment. During her final days, Satsuki visited her every day. All she could do now was spend as much time as possible with the woman who, as a maid, had selflessly cared for her for 17 years.